You know, it's really strange that after seeing the peak of Shadow the Hedgehog's character in 2006 with Sonic 06, how they just totally fumbled his character directly after that. I never understood why they had such a hard time knowing where to go exactly with his character. Instead of putting him in games like Unleashed, which would have been a great little side story to have, just what's Shadow dealing with while the world is being torn to pieces by Dark Gaia and all this other stuff is going on. Like, what was he doing during that time? Because we know he was around. He must have been working with Rouge and Omega, you know, helping people in need, working with Gun, but we never got to see any of that. And I feel like, why did Gun have to disappear? You know, it's such a weird time for them to disappear when they've always been a really huge part of the Sonic world. Where there's humans, there's Gun. So in a time of such apocalyptic crisis, you would think that Gun would be there, at least to some capacity, during the events of Unleashed in specific, but also just in general. And then the drastic shift in tone during the Colors era didn't really allow for something like Shadow. It's almost like what they thought people didn't like about 06 and Unleashed was the dark more meaningful story, and it wasn't the gameplay that was the problem, right? Because that was the real problem. We had no problem with the story or the characters. It was always the game itself that didn't function properly. And I think 06, while it did a lot of great things in the story, it also did a lot of things I'm not a huge fan of. And on top of that, just forever left this stain, right? And I feel like that had something to do with them excluding Shadow, because not only did they feel like, well, Mephiles is a good final villain for Shadow, it was like Shadow realizing even more, like standing by what he sort of came to the conclusion of in the true ending of Shadow the Hedgehog, which is that he's going to decide who he is, and he becomes this hero, not because anyone told him to, but because that's what he has naturally chosen to be. And so to see that play out in 06 is a really interesting thing. And I think what's funny to me when I look back at 06, to me that was just the beginning for his character. We got through all the amnesia, we got through him realizing who he is. Now that he knows who he is, we only get one game with that Shadow. We only get one game. We don't even know what happened between him and Gun. Did they continue to work together? Did he leave? Did they let him go? What's his relationship like with humanity? You know, these are themes that I just don't really see explored all that well. And that's why when I wrote my story, the relationship between humans and what I call Mobians, for lack of a better term, is allowed to be explored. So I just found it pretty jarring that over the years they seemed so avoidant of this character and everything relating to that character, you know, everything around it. Rouge, Omega, Gun, references to Maria. You know, we only just recently in Frontiers had Eggman talking about Maria in one of the voice memos or whatever, but I really don't think that that's enough. You know, I think that what we're getting with Shadow Generations, which is really what made me want to talk about this again, is that it's more relevant than ever to talk about his character. So I think the importance of Shadow Generations is to not only celebrate his character, just like Generations celebrated Sonic and Classic Sonic. I think Shadow Generations will celebrate Shadow and all of his villains and his games, right, that he was featured in, or that was his own game, right? I think particularly they're showing a lot of love for Shadow the Hedgehog, the game. Unexpected, but very welcome, because it is such an important part of the story that I feel like people just overlook because it feels so different from all the other stories, which I think is a pretty silly reason to just skip the story or pretend like it's a part of another universe or something like that, like it doesn't exist. But I think the most important takeaway for Shadow Generations will be, how does this change the future for the character? Is this going to bring the character back in a way that it stays that way? Or is it just for this year because we're celebrating this character, right? Because of the movie. Is it like as soon as the movie is out the door and gone, the game is out as well? Is this kind of it? What I hope is that, especially because they have Ian Flynn on board, they're able to write new arcs for this character, because I've seen it myself. I mean, writing for this character, it may seem like there's a lot of dead ends, like where do you go from here? How do you make this interesting, you know? And really it's that, like, sometimes when a character reaches their peak, when they've like got everything figured out seemingly, they just drop the character, and I don't get it, because that's when you can have the most fun with a character, is that, oh, well, they think they have everything figured out, right? But we're gonna show them in this next story arc how they're wrong about that, and there's still a lot of things they have to learn, and there's still a lot of growth to be had in this character, and there's still a lot of inner conflict. And I've watched a lot of TV shows and movies watching characters over the course of a long span of time go through so many different changes. It's like, obviously this is a way that you can write a character. It's not the case that the character development is ever finished and done. It's never done. I think there is times to make the audience feel like it's done, to make the story feel more complete and conclusive and triumphant. But I think the reality of the situation is that when the next story comes along, there needs to be something for them to be grappling with and dealing with. And if there isn't, it's simply not going to be as interesting. And maybe that's what they were afraid of, is that they just couldn't think of anything. But to me, that just screams a lack of creativity, because there is so many good stories that you could tell, and so many different ways you could add more character development to him. And so this is what I'd like to see, not only just from the movies that are coming out, and possibly he may make appearances in the Knuckles show. I don't know what they're planning, but whatever they end up doing with Shadow in the games and in the movies and just media in general, I hope they have a plan to further develop his character. I hope that we're going to get another standalone game, and they'll give that another shot and not be so afraid of something that happened over a decade ago, back in 2005, almost 2 decades ago. I mean, we have to let that go. We have to let this character spread its wings and fly again. We can't just be so afraid of like, well, what are people going to think? What if we get it wrong? It's like, well, if you have writers who are passionate about the character, that won't happen. And if the game is fun, that won't happen. It's as simple as that. It's so, like, Sonic Team was in such a strange place during 2005, from what I understand. It's like they're suddenly developing as a third-party developer. They're no longer working on stuff on their own console. They have to just make games for whatever consoles are available, which was Nintendo GameCube, PS2 at the time. And so I'm sure that was a big transition for them, and Sonic Heroes is a testament to that. A lot of people really like that return to form, and not necessarily acknowledging the darker aspects of the story, just kind of playing it real safe, and then Shadow the Hedgehog just suddenly flipping all that on its head. It's clear that they had a lot of ambition and the stories they wanted to tell, and they had a vision. And I feel like that vision in the early to late 2010s era, around Colors and all that stuff, it just kind of seems like they got off track for like a long time. And Lost World, it's like, where does that story even take place? It could honestly take place anywhere, and it would change nothing, because the story is practically nothing. I think it's a good concept. It's a cool concept, like, oh, this floating planet in the sky that they go and explore. Like, it's kind of like Little Planet from Sonic CD. I love that shit. The decision to make it all hexagonal, like, why? Like, why? To make it look all like Nintendo-ish and like Mario-ish, it's just kind of, it was a strange choice, and I didn't like it, if I'm being honest, and it didn't, this is not what anyone grew up with. I don't even think the classic games looked that cartoony and cutesy, as much as we'd like to think. I think Lost World went a little overboard, and then going from Lost World to something like Forces, it just makes no sense. Like, the tone has been all over the place, and then that episode Shadow DLC was just like, I hate to go down memory lane of like why I'm so disappointed, and just the disappointment that I'm sure we've all felt, especially if you're a Shadow fan. It's just like, how frustrating has it been the past 10 years, and I've grown up, I'm an adult now, and that's why, like, I took matters into my own hands and just decided to tell the stories I wanted to tell and put it out there and be done with it. Now that I'm seeing, well, there is a hope. It's like, well, let's see what they do. And I guess that's what I wanted to say in this video, that the potential for greatness with this character and this franchise as a whole is very high right now. And it would really suck if everything were to come crashing down now, after all the build-up that Frontiers did, and pretty much everything they've been releasing as of late has been really, really solid. Superstars was on the borderline of being something a little disappointing, but generally everything has been really good, and I see that this is a time of celebration for this character. So I hope there is a really good narrative attached to Shadow Generations that paves the way for a future, and that we get to see Shadow appear more often. And it's not like he has to be there all the time, as much as I would not be opposed to that. That I think he should be a part of the main cast, and I think he should appear more often, but that's just me. I think that things can really change, but I'm not holding my breath. At the same time, I'm very skeptical, but I'm also very excited. So we'll see what happens for the future. All I know is that it is weird after all this time, almost 10 years, to pick up a character that you sort of dropped, and I really hope they don't forget about that character development that was built, and they keep that as a part of him instead of just making him this caricature of what he once was, which I think all the characters became that around the 2010 era. I think that was just inevitable due to the way they chose to write their stories and portray their characters. So that's about it. I think that's all I have to say in this video. I just wanted to sort of reiterate that I'm hopeful and the future is looking bright for this character, and that I'm really excited to see where things go. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you. If you enjoyed what you watched, it would be really helpful to give this video a like and check out the channel. I have my own animated series. There's a lot going on. I do a lot of discussion videos. I talk about all different kinds of things in this franchise, so if you're interested in that, be sure to check it out. But anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out, creators.